Hey guys, happy, what day is it? Thursday? Happy Thursday, almost done this week. Today I'm just going to talk more about the elements of style when it comes to poetry. We're going to talk a little bit about imagery and figurative language. And then tomorrow we're going to talk about tone, and that will wrap up our little lesson for this week on style. And next week we will move on to a different element of poetry. As you can see, I'm back in my classroom, happy to be back here. It is still sad being here without you guys, so hopefully we will come back before the end of the year, but if not, I am hoping I will get to see all of you again in the fall. I'm going to make you come stop by and say hi to me. And then once again, I wanted to remind you that there is a Zoom meeting this afternoon from 2 to 3 to answer any questions that you guys might have regarding anything with the poetry unit or anything else that's on your mind, even if you just want to chat, that's fine too. Okay, so imagery and figurative language are both things that we've already talked about. They're both literary elements that we've discussed previously, but I'm just going to give you guys a quick reminder and how they relate to poetry. So imagery is basically any kind of word choice that appeals to one of our senses. So sight, touch, smell, sound, taste, anything that kind of brings up that image in our head or makes us feel like we're, smelling the scent of fresh baked chocolate chip cookies or, feeling a windy breeze by the ocean, anything like that. Imagery is just meant to help create an immersive environment, help you as the reader be able to picture everything that's going on in the setting, from the sound to the sights, to the sense, anything like that, in order to just make the poem feel more real, help it jump out at you, make it easier to understand, help the meaning become clear, all that stuff. It just helps the reader better grasp the setting and feel like they're part of the poem, which when you have an immersive reading experience through figurative language, it always makes a poem more enjoyable. Sometimes poets will choose to include very little imagery so that you feel kind of lost and confused because maybe that's the tone that they're trying to set. That's kind of the feeling they want you to get out of that poem. And sometimes they will overload you, sensory overload with imagery, to make you feel overwhelmed. That might also be one of their intentions in the poem. So imagery is something that can be used by authors for many, many different reasons when it comes to poetry. But mainly it's just meant to help create an immersive environment and help you as the reader feel like you are in the poem. So I'm going to give an example from the poem that we've been reading from, Robert Frost's Stopping by Woods on a Snowy Evening. So in one of the stanzas he writes, "He gives his harness bells a shake to ask if there is some mistake. The only other sounds the sweep of easy wind and downy flake." So that's a really good example of imagery. We have the harness bells shaking, so you guys can picture that kind of soft shaking of harness bells when you're in a horse-drawn carriage. Think of movies or different sounds like that you might have heard that can remind you of that soft kind of bell shaking. And then the only other sound, so we know from that it's completely silent. We're in a quiet, snowy woods. This horse is shaking his bells, otherwise it's completely quiet. And the only other sound is of easy wind. So it's not harsh wind, it's really soft, it's a gentle breeze, and downy flakes. So it's a very peaceful environment. There's a soft snowfall, a very light breeze, just the horse and him alone in this woods. So it's meant to be a very peaceful setting, kind of calm. The poet, the speaker in this poem, is kind of doing some reflection. It's meant to kind of be relaxing and to help you visualize the calmness of the setting. There's not a lot of else going on. There's just this slight breeze, this like gentle snowfall, the horse kind of gently moving his harness. Otherwise it's very quiet, very calm, very still. And that's kind of the attitude that Frost is trying to portray. So he used imagery to get that across to us. So that's imagery, just word choice meant to help appeal to our five senses. And then figurative language incorporates a ton of things. It's a literary element that is just used to kind of, it's basically an umbrella term, and it covers different things like simile, metaphor, hyperbole, personification, and allusion, different things like that where you're referencing something outside of the poem or making a comparison within the poem, or just using a specific literary element to get a point across that's different than just using standard language. So again, we've talked about figurative language quite a bit before. We started off the semester talking about different elements of grammar, and figurative language was in there. But just a reminder, simile is a comparison of things that aren't necessarily similar, using words such as like or as. So she is as graceful as a butterfly. That's a simile, to kind of give us some comparison and some visual. A metaphor is a direct comparison that doesn't use the words like or as. So if you were talking about a football player and you said he's a steamroller on the football field, obviously the person's not a literal steamroller. That is a metaphor to help us visualize kind of the intensity of that player. A hyperbole is a deliberate exaggeration or overstatement. So anytime you say anything like, "I've told you this a million times," or something like that. Can't think of another example off the top of my head right now. But that's hyperbole, is when you're deliberately exaggerating to kind of emphasize your emotions about a thing. So a lot of times hyperbole is used to express frustration. especially if you think like a mom saying like, I've told you to do this a million times, something like that. That's a frustration that's being expressed through hyperbole. And personification is when you give human qualities to something that is non-human. So if you were to say, the wind whistled through the trees, obviously whistling is not something wind can do, but it helps us visualize what's going on. It appeals to our senses. It's another form of imagery, something like that. And then allusion is a reference to something well known. So if we are maybe reading through a poem and they reference something like an Achilles heel, that's a reference, that's an allusion to Greek mythology. We know, because we understand Greek mythology, that if someone has an Achilles heel, that's like their weakness. That's what an allusion is kind of a very literary, very poetic way to reference something without having to outright say it. So if I was trying to say like his weak spot is like dessert, that's his Achilles heel, instead of saying, you know, he has a weakness for dessert, I'd say dessert is his Achilles heel, and it just sounds more poetic that way. It gives us a nice illusion. We understand better that that's kind of the source of his weakness. That's a downfall for him. He loves dessert, stuff like that. So once again, figurative language is an umbrella term that kind of encompasses a lot of different things that basically just use words and use language and manipulate it in a certain way to help us better understand something that's going on in the poem, whether it's a comparison, whether it's a reference to something else, whether it's trying to get us to use our senses to visualize what's happening, anything like that. Figurative language kind of covers all of those things, and basically it just means, you know, I'm using language instead of a regular straightforward way to sense something. I'm saying it in this more poetic way to help you better understand and better visualize what's going on. It may seem simpler to say things outright, but actually usually when we use figurative language, we better understand what's happening because it's more direct, it's more descriptive, and it helps us better immerse ourselves in the poem. So that's figurative language and imagery basically summed up for you guys. Again, these are two different terms that we've already talked about quite a bit this semester, so it should be a reminder, but if you are confused about any of that, if you have any questions about imagery or figurative language at all, please just let me know. And then tomorrow I will do another brief lesson regarding tone in poetry and what that looks like, and then make sure that you are filling out your note sheet in classroom. It's in the classwork section. That goes right along with this slideshow. I'm looking at this slideshow on my computer. I don't know if you can see it. Right here is what I'm referencing, so everything that I say goes along with the slideshow. And then make sure you are also taking the time to read Edgar Allan Poe's poem, The Raven. I'll talk about that more tomorrow as well, and complete the assignment that goes along with that. That makes you analyze it for style a little bit. Otherwise, I hope you guys have a great Thursday. I miss you very much. Looking forward to seeing you hopefully soon. Yeah, stay healthy.